Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, People, Tools, and Planning for Success, What is in a Good Asset Manager's Toolbox? I'm Kelly Pickerel, editor with Solar Power World, and before we begin, we want to let you know of a few things. This webinar will be sent to all registrants so you can view it again at your convenience. Slides are available to view at any time via the resource widget at the bottom of your screen. You can submit any questions related to today's webinar in the Q&A widget. We will try to answer these during the webcast. If we do not get to your question, our presenters may reach out to you afterwards. We welcome you to tweet with us using the hashtag SolarWebinar. And finally, if you are watching this on demand, you can still use all of these features. So let's get started with today's webinar, People, Tools, and Planning for Success, What is in a Good Asset Manager's Toolbox. Today's speakers are Larry Freeman, Business Development Manager, Asset Administration, Lee Connor, Asset Administration Manager, and Eric Orsino, Customer Account Manager, all with EDF Renewable Services. They will share items in their asset management toolbox, including software and automation that enable them to optimize site operation. And now I'll turn it over to the EDF team.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. This is Larry Freeman. Again, I appreciate the introduction there. I head up our efforts here in the business development and the actual operations of our third-party asset services. Work with a team, which Lee Connor is on with us today, and she is, let's go ahead and introduce yourself, Lee.
Thanks, Larry. As Larry said, my name is Lee Connor. I work with Larry. I'm an asset administration manager. I've been with EDF for over 8 years now, have a background in construction management, and then have been working in asset management and asset administration management for about the last 5 years.
And this is Eric Orsino. I am a customer account manager at EDF Renewable Services. I liaise between the groups within asset management and our service teams. I have a background in finance, and I've been with EDF for just under a year now.
Okay, so our agenda, what are we going to talk about today? Put the title as People, Tools, and Planning for Success. And the idea here that we wanted to talk about is first we're going to talk about how we see asset management. We found that in the third-party world market for other projects that it's not always a clear definition amongst different companies or what those services entail. So we'll sort of lay the ground rules there. Then we're going to talk about what makes a successful asset manager, who are the people that we need to provide these services, and then we'll get into the tools, right? Including software automation, and the discussion I think is very interesting about what you can and cannot effectively automate. Then we'll go into to what it takes after we put these things together in the onboarding for success to be able to really hit the ground running as the project goes COD and the revenue starts coming in. And then finally we'll wrap this up and then talk about what the next episode in this series will be, which will then talk about some more real-world examples of what this looks like in practice, the groundwork that we've laid today. Okay, so with that, what is asset management? So as we define it, right, coming from a company, EDF, that has a very robust organization, including our own generation or asset management group, we see it as not a narrowly defined function of just ensuring compliance, billing, TPA counterparty work, the warranty management. We see that really all the way through as to everything that it takes to make a project run smoothly from the day-to-day standpoint after COD. And that can bring in a lot of different works and parties, right? Because we have, not only doing the analysis on the generation, the operation, budgets and spending, but then really doing analysis of your revenue, of curtailment, right? Making sure that all the stakeholders are coordinated. I think certainly anyone who has spent any amount of time working a project can tell you that just the coordination when it comes into taking outages or retrofit work can sometimes bring in as many as 15 to 20 different groups. And we see the asset manager's job as keeping all of those moving smoothly and making sure that everyone, the experts in every aspect, are doing their jobs. And then, so next to that, how do we? Oh,
no, sorry, Larry, keep going. No, I thought you were done.
Yeah, no, that's sorry, folks. And then just one last thought on that. So now that we know that we have all of these different groups of stakeholders that we're doing, I think the next part of that is, how do we fit into our group and how do we break up the responsibilities? So within our group, we have people dedicated specifically to handling the what I'll call the bookkeeping or accounting aspects. I'm not getting up into, I would say, full accounting. And with that, that is ensuring PPA and REC invoicing, right, keeping the books and ledgers correct, right, and we allow one person to own that and own the software platform we utilize to do that. And then we break up projects that are assigned individual asset managers so they can become the owner of that process and that project so that we can stay coordinated. So there's, in essence, a driver on each project. And then where I sit in the group is to ensure that everyone is working towards the same goals and that we're properly coordinated. So with that, sorry, Eric, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no problem, Larry, and thanks for that. That's certainly very clear, and that's very helpful. Can you help us understand the value an asset manager provides to a specific organization?
Sure. I think as we see it, the value of an asset manager, right, and having that person who has ownership of the project, it extends beyond just ensuring that all of the tasks get done, right? These are what I refer to as the thou shalt, right? Ensuring that insurance policies and letters of credit are posted upon renewable and that equity reports go out at the proper time. What we're really looking at here in the value of that asset manager is ensuring that there is one person, right, who takes ownership of the project to ensure that all of the individual components get done. And I think that sort of leadership or ownership is the ultimate value of an asset manager.
Yeah, certainly having one person provide ownership and leadership is very important on a project. Lee, in your opinion, what's the most complex aspect of your job?
That's a good question, Eric. I think that for me, what I spend a fair amount of time on is balancing the needs of different types of investors. So for instance, if we have a cash equity investor and a tax equity investor in a project, their end goals are different. The tax equity investor obviously wants to maximize the production tax credits that they receive from the project, and a cash equity investor wants to maximize revenue so that their distributions are as high as possible. And so sometimes that can create a conflict in how to manage particular issues. So I think, one thing that I spend a lot of time doing is just balancing those needs and then ultimately trying to come up with a solution that has the project's best interest and also balances both tax and cash equity investors' needs.
Great, yeah, and definitely a difficult role, but I'm glad you're involved with that. So
for, I think another point that we wanted to bring up was basically some of what Larry was talking to previously, but that if you look at what we call Asset Management 101 or what asset managers are responsible for, it's really soup to nuts, anything from when the project was operational, any project need. So we manage interconnection agreements, we manage power purchase agreements, we manage not only the administrative aspects, but also marketing strategy for any renewable energy credits. We provide information for whatever the auditing requirements may be for a project. We help any sort of tax manager do filings or whatever is required for the project. We work very closely with service providers. I think we'd like to highlight in particular, we work with forecasting, with energy services, with any IT services that are required, or data historian providers, and any sort of SCADA or monitoring that is working for the project. We also, like I previously mentioned, we manage cash and tax equity, and we liaison also directly with landowners.
And with all these categories, I mean, it seems like an inordinate amount of things to deal with. Is there a particular category that you spend most of your time on, Lee?
Yes, I think ultimately at the heart of the role of asset management, our job is basically a customer service job. And so our biggest goal is to make sure that our clients are happy with the service that they are receiving. And typically to do that, it's really balancing all of the items that I had just previously mentioned to make sure that the project is optimized and performing as best as it possibly can, so that ultimately at the end of the day, our clients are happy.
Yeah, I guess that's the name of the game. You know, customer service is always number one in everyone's book. So glad to hear that you're on top of that. And Larry, you know, given your experience and you know your familiarity with all of the nuances, what would you say the most challenging category for you is?
It's an interesting question. I would not say that there's any one category that is more challenging than others, right? You know, we expect an asset manager to be a generalist, right, and to know what is happening. I think for me, what is most difficult is the time management aspect of it, right? There are many deliverables throughout the year, and even weekly and monthly throughout the cycle of a project that are very hard deadlines, right? And no one ever wants to hear that their deadline slipped because something else happened. So it's that time management aspect that I find most interesting. You know, we can use and do employ several different tools to keep track of what is due, and we have a very regular monthly flow, right? You know, making sure that submissions for final meter reads to the meter agent are complete by the 5th business day of the month. Ensuring that we receive reports from all the other stakeholders by the 10th to compile, right, to have a delivery date at either the 15th or the 20th on monthly reports. And the invoicing cycle, right? You know, there are all of these things that have to be done and that we plan for and around. But the challenging part is that on any given day when you come in and open your email, you don't actually know what the fire drill of the day is going to be. And it's managing and properly prioritizing those competing interests that matter, right? You know, so I may, it's very often for me, I'll block out a couple hours in the afternoon to review a set of reports, opine and have calls scheduled. And, you know, there could be an entirely new issue today. There is, an unscheduled outage, on a line that requires just everything drops and handle the fire drill. So I think that's the toughest part is on a day-to-day basis, not, while I have the greatest intentions, is not actually knowing what I'm going to be working on that day.
Yeah, I mean, managing the change and all the things that go on your day-to-day basis does sound challenging, but, thank you for that insight. That's very, very interesting.
So, that kind of creates a really good segue into, what's here. So now we talked about all the different pieces that an asset manager in an asset management group have to appropriately manage and juggle. And so what is it? Who do we look for in an asset manager that could be successful in this? I think overall, and I mentioned it a moment ago, it's a generalist, right? You need someone who has, the intellectual capability to be able to know what tools to use to increase their accuracy and their efficiency, and also when to understand, how all of the different competing interests in a project play together. You need that person who's able to identify the issues ahead of time and utilize the experts to solve those problems. Right, in any given day, right, you may come in and again, scan your emails, your coffee, plan out your day, right, and there's an innocuous-looking email sitting halfway down your box that, could be something that if not dealt with appropriately and immediately can blow up to be a much larger issue later. So you need that person who can, frankly has that self-preservation instinct to know when something is important and also to know when something, can wait or can be dealt with or delegated. And that leads to that idea of understanding, again, the big picture. We drew that previous slide had, all of the different counterparties in there. And really we had even talked about breaking that down further and decided it was, the reality of it is even, that much more complex to understand. So you need a person who can synthesize all of those different issues. And then, I think finally what you need that asset manager to do is to know that there's not one magic tool that's going to automate the job for you, right? Everybody wants to look at all the different things that has to be done and say, wouldn't it be great if I had an app that could do that for me? And I think the real trick is someone that can understand to take responsibility and know that there's not a solution to solve all of the problems for you. I mean, that is your asset manager, right? Your, to use an old O&M term, your organic servo. That is the person at the key of this. It has to be the one that knows how to employ the tools.
Okay, so I'd like to pose a question to the group. Lee, Larry, whomever wants to go first, please do. But given that there are so many relationships that need to be bridged within the asset manager's job function, what would you say the best qualities for an asset manager are in order to be successful?
I'll go first on that one. I think that from my perspective, the most important quality for a good asset manager is basically to be a jack of all trades. I think, somebody who knows enough about all the aspects of a project to be able to communicate with a wide range of experts on a topic, whether that be site managers, folks who are actually out turning wrenches on turbines, or doing testing on solar projects, all the way up to tax equity investors who obviously have more of a financial focus. I think that, just having, like I said, a little bit of knowledge about a lot of things and being able to communicate effectively with experts on all of those topics is really an important aspect for any asset manager to master.
Interesting. And Larry, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think Lee did a good job of really emphasizing that point. I would say also something to keep in consideration that even with the greatest asset manager, the best person possible in that position, you also have to have a framework set up, and that really starts with your asset management agreement or your project administration agreement right at the beginning that sets out the rules so that you can allow this person to do their job effectively and so that those responsibilities are also understood by all parties. So having that good baseline agreement, right, to set up the structure for this generalist to work in is also very key.
Great, thank you.
I also think that, so we've spent some time talking about the qualities that an asset manager needs to have to be successful. But I think another important aspect of asset management success is really the need for robust organizational support. I think that having experts to rely on really helps us meet our project goals more effectively. So, asset managers count on accounting services, and they count on, project finance experts, as well as engineers and attorneys, operations and maintenance folks on site to really be able to meet all of the contractual compliance items that they have. I think, being able also to depend on a very technically savvy operations control center to know what's going on site on a real-time basis is another really important tool for an asset manager to be able to rely on.
Yeah, and my next question, kind of goes around the complexity within, all of these organizations. Given that you have all of these business units that you need to work with, what is your secret to success? How do you manage it, and how do you succeed within the asset management world?
Yeah, I'll take that one here, Eric. For me, right, the key to that is having a sense of humility and knowing when to engage the support, right? There's no group, right, has unlimited resources available to answer any of the thousands of potential problems that could come up relating to a project or a portfolio on any given day. Right, and you have to balance that, ability to know, again, when a problem is serious, and then when to really, bring in the big guns and to spin everybody up, and so understanding when to do that, and also, when to use those cards, right? It's maintaining the relationships within those groups. So not only knowing when you need to call someone, but knowing whom to call, and when you call them, or send an email or set up a conference, is understanding, when you're asking them for advice and support versus when you're asking them to take on a very discrete and specific scope of work to provide something, such as an operational analysis to you. So that's, to me, that's the key there.
And Lee, what do you think? What secrets do you feel are key to your success?
I think my answer somewhat mirrors Larry's, in that I think it's really important to be able to rely on experts who have taken, they've dedicated their entire careers to mastering disciplines that can really provide solutions to project challenges. So for instance, if there is an outage and, it's some sort of relay setting issue that has occurred time and time again, I'm not the best person to deal with that. My job is to be able to find the right engineer who can review those relay settings and then, come up with ways to reprogram them so that that fault doesn't continue to happen on site. And I think, it's the same thing with any, myriad of problems that occur on site, where it really is the asset manager identifying the issue and then being able to quickly problem solve and reach out to the proper expert who will really be able to provide the solution to the problem. I think for me that's something that has really helped me succeed in the industry.
Yeah, I would say, the problem solving aspect and more importantly the communication is probably integral, and that's very, very interesting. Yeah, so we'll move on to the next.
Yeah, so we've gotten to this point now, so we know who we need in place and the type of support that is required, right, to take on and successfully manage a project, right, and meet all the requirements. And so the next piece of this is, what tools you provide for these people to use, not just the organizational support, and then to have the basic, the skills and the qualities to succeed. And now what do you put in their hands, right? Putting the scalpel into the surgeon's hands, so to speak, and what tools do you use to actually get the job done?
Yeah, I think a popular message in the industry today is basically that providing tools, or in other terms, automation, will make asset management easy. And although I agree that coming up with the right tools that, will basically, help to automate asset management is the future to streamlining this industry, I don't think that automation will ever make the job simple. So I think that, as most asset managers can attest to, every month when you're putting together all of your, monthly operating reports, doing any sort of reporting, I think that most of us sit around and dream about being able to enter data one time and have it go to all of the different places that we need. I think that for most of us, coming up with an improved automated system that can, provide all the metrics that we need to all the different systems that we need can't come fast enough. However, more efficient processes do not replace the need for an asset manager. I think what more efficient processes do and what automation can do is give an asset manager the ability to spend their time on more value-added activities for the project. I think that as the industry matures, it's easy to see the trend of automation. If you look at all the different platforms that we have to use, for instance, we upload SREC data into different systems depending on the ISO, and we upload EIA information, which is basically production information, and then every company has a different way of doing their monthly operating reports that go to owners and investors, and a lot of that information is all duplicative. And I think in some ways, when you're put in the situation of managing multiple platforms, it can even make your job harder or less efficient than if you weren't having to do that. So I think, as the industry continues to mature, hopefully the future will involve some sort of tool that can communicate with all the different platforms that are required for us to meet our compliance items and ensure project success.
Yeah, and Lee, that's really interesting, and I would add on, I think you hit a very key point there, right? It is the time and the effort to really get everything into one environment, right, where your data lives at one place. It populates everywhere that it needs to go, right? And then it allows the asset manager, again, to really focus on the big picture and making decisions that are in the best financial interest of everyone. And the real trick to that is the cost versus time factor. I mean, certainly it's amazing. I think that I can pick up my, my smartphone, and with an app, I can get a plane ticket, land where I'm going, make a reservation at a hotel for dinner, and buy tickets to the theater, right? And I can do that off of, a small device sitting in my pocket. And the real trick with what we're doing here is the cost aspect of that, right? For a large company, your Googles and Amazons, right, and Expedias and such of the world, who are able to put those resources because there's enough volume of people using those apps, they seem really elegant. And I think what we forget is that, every project is unique, has its own stakeholders and its own data feeds and its own PPA off-takers and your own historians and turbine or inverter types, right? And the time necessary to get all time and cost necessary to get all of those things into a single automated environment, right, where things literally go on autopilot and done, and the asset manager sits back with their cup of coffee and and thinks about how to make more money. That volume typically just doesn't exist here. And again, while there's platforms that are making some amazing strides, you have to be conscious in thinking strategically about your group and what you accomplish, about how complex you make your systems, right? But I'm certainly by no means a Luddite, but I do, find that sometimes a simpler solution is the more effective one, right? Because when you have, created a system that is so complex where you're writing scripts to go out and, download import LMP price data to go into curtailment signals, to go, into these sort of analysis, what you open yourself up to is a place where having a significant cost ongoing to manage those systems that may not scale appropriately, and also hamstringing yourself so that when there is a problem or one of these 15 other stakeholders, right, that are feeding you information makes a coding change that your whole system crashes. So the ability to make this and look towards the future is certainly probably what I lose the most sleep over, and I also have some of the most, hopes for the future. I know some of the technology majors are working on, for instance, blockchain technology, because of those abilities, will allow for automated settling of contracts, right? So, minting and transferring RECs could actually happen in an automated system, right? But that's, we're at the mercy of, waiting for those things to come into broader use and then finding out how to employ them. And I think that goes back to that sense of humility again, of understanding, exactly what you can or can't accomplish and what you have to wait on. So, for me, it's that getting it in. And then the final piece to the puzzle here in your tools is it's not just tools to gather data for you, but I'm looking for tools that turn the data into information. There are several platforms out there that use software solutions such as Tableau, right, to feed disparate pieces of data into, say, a SQL server that can be queried by Tableau and create some really powerful analytic tools, which do exist. And those for me are where I have the most hope, right? Being able to effectively see, looking in a properly designed, interactive, feature dashboard where I can look at, say, a series of faults on a wind plant, across the turbine, right? And what was my cost of downtime in the month, right? And versus looking at a standard canned monthly report coming from the OEM or the operator, being able to instead visualize these in an interactive display where I can say, great, we all had these amount of faults here. Well, I know that was because of a grid outage we had. And quickly swipe those away and re-visualize everything so I can hone in on the problems that we can affect and can control the outcome of.
Very, very interesting points on strategic vision. I mean, I'm very interested to see, how blockchain technology comes down the pike in 5 or 10 years. But, my question relates to, current resources. You referenced Tableau as one of those that you utilize. But, what would you say is the most important tool within your arsenal today that you can employ?
So that's a very fair question and a good question. And I have sort of a contrary answer here, right? I do not believe, and I'm sort of, because we work in the third-party world, we need to be somewhat agnostic, right? Because I cannot choose what systems are brought to me to use, right? There are things that we can do as overlays and to consolidate, but I would say that the best tool or the most important tool is the one that the individual asset manager is most comfortable with and allows them to be most successful. Everybody on our team has different projects with different needs, right? And so, for instance, I have one asset manager who primarily, works on a portfolio of distributed generation assets, right? And others, right, who will work primarily on large wind projects, maybe even further, a large wind project that's merchant, right? And so those tools and solutions are very different. And so it is difficult to say that there is a tool that works for these types of projects, say, a merchant wind project versus a distributed generation or C&I solar portfolio. So it is the tool that within those environments allows the asset manager to be the most successful and the one that they truly enjoy using.
Interesting. Very interesting. So, this next slide, kind of goes into, how software can meet the strategic vision and the mission. But, as renewable energy becomes more prominent globally, what do you see for the future of your team and the level of automation required? Larry, why don't you jump in on that one first, if you would?
Sure. So I will say that the challenge of automation, again, is something that I spend, most of my sleepless nights and also have the most hope for, is because being scalable as the business grows, right, is truly important. The old model if you think back to the early 2000s and we were just, wind was really coming into its own here in the United States. And, that 2007, 8, 9 time frame with solar, right, the portfolios and the projects were such that an asset manager with an Outlook inbox and calendar and Excel, right, could do most of the work. And, the real issue there is that it's just simply not a scalable solution, right, nor is it effective. Yes, we could go back to the 19th century, right, where, the original definition of a computer was a human who sat with a ledger book and computed, right? Now we're, in many ways, many of the asset management solutions are just an updated version of that. Nothing revolutionary has really come along and happen, right? You know, where they have more efficient tools than a slide rule, moving to a calculator right now, moving to some of the better things that we have today, but we're still not solving the fundamental question of scalability, right? You know, how is it, when we think about the strategic vision, that we can have, you know, one asset manager can effectively provide the level of attention and analytical thinking and services to 3, 4 projects, you know, not 1 or 2. You know, and further, how do we bring all of these things in? And that, for me, is, you know, the key in the vision there that we're trying to work for.
Lee, what are your thoughts?
I know you hear me saying from my position, but I know you don't always have to say in my opinions. Please go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say that I think just, you know, I agree with everything that you said, Larry, but just a little different perspective in that if we look at asset management growing globally, I think it's even more important for us to find a way for all of the different systems that we use to speak one unified language. I think if we're going to be efficient asset managers, like what Larry was saying, where we're not managing 1 or 2 projects, but we're able to manage 5 or 10 or 20 projects, I think part of that is really eliminating the duplicative data entry work that we all do every month in using these different systems that, you know, are required for us to meet our contractual compliance requirements. So I think, you know, hopefully as an industry we work together to come up with systems, like I said, that can all speak the same language, and then that will allow us to really add value and to be able to do that on a much larger scale than we're currently doing.
You know, the scalability and the strategic vision need to come together at some point for certain.
Yeah, and I think just you know, sort of final thought on that one, and this can, you know, lead us right into next here. But you know, both with thinking about the future and then in bringing, you know, projects on, you know, it is that vision of what you're trying to accomplish and what you have to work with that really matters, right? You know, I think about it like, you know, planning a meal, right? You know, so first you need to have the vision of what it is you're trying to accomplish or planning that meal. Then you have to gather the ingredients, right, and everything you need. Then you actually have to cook it and prepare it and make sure that it is, you know, that it is excellent. And then you actually have to finally serve it up. And I think when we talk about, you know, one, the technology that allows that to happen, you know, it is those, you know, those final bits that we're trying to work out. I think there's a good sense of what we need. And it goes back to that time and cost issue of, you know, how can that get built and who's going to bring it through, right? You know, I would, you know, encourage the audience or anyone out there in the public, you know, that we all need to work on this together for the betterment of the industry. And for instance, if someone knows of a great solution coming down the road, you know, where, for instance, we use the example of going in and uploading, you know, data, even if you could do that as a feed, right, for PJM SREC market, right, and get the data uploaded and then to mint and within the PJM environment, right, to then mint and transfer the SRECs. You know, I would encourage everyone to, you know, let's please help everyone out with that.
Yeah, Larry, and that's a great segue. You know, moving into this slide here, you know, it's all about ensuring a smooth transition. You know, from construction to operation, there is, you know, a myriad of problems associated with that. So, you know, you have to, you know, be cognizant of the fact that there is necessary documentation that needs to be done in advance. You know, that goes towards your point on strategic vision. You have to be aware of what's going on. You also have to be able to access credentials to integrate systems into the ones that you're using. You know, again, it goes towards vision and goes towards the scalability of the project. You have to receive, you know, the key stakeholder contact information and make sure that all of your lines of communication are really set in stone so that there are no hiccups during the entire process. And, you know, have your account user or representative authorization for counterparties and service providers. Having that ability to speak for your services to get the job done is integral. And, for me as a customer account manager, I sit between the asset managers and the service organization. And, there can be issues with what the client wants versus what the service teams can perform. Managing those relationships, as Lee had brought up earlier, is one of those really important roles, and certainly one that's key for me on the services side. So, Larry, in your experience, what's the best way to manage the stresses that the client and service teams feel during a difficult period in a project's life?
Sure. I think, again, anyone who's ever lived through taking a project from construction through COD to operations can tell you that nothing ever goes fully according to plan, right? And it does become very stressful, right? There are big dollars on the line, competing interest in contracts, potential liquidated damages, right? Whose fault is it? And so for me, the most important thing is understanding what you can and cannot control and then planning around that. So as an example of that, right, you may be bringing a project getting late into the process, and there is, truly an issue coming around that is beyond your control, say at the interconnecting substation, right, that sets all of the project schedules back. That can then affect, your ability to take accelerated depreciation, right, and that is huge dollar amount impact. And at some point, you simply cannot control that, right? So there's nothing you can do. You throw your hands up. But what is important to understand is, okay, this has been served up to us. Now, what can we do to ameliorate the pain, right, and to keep everyone moving forward in a unified manner without, just, relying on pointing fingers. Because that's certainly, sometimes legitimately fingers need to be pointed. But mostly it's a fact of, there are events that have competing interests.
Right, sure. And Lee, the next question I think is better directed towards you. When you're dealing with a client that does not have a great deal of experience transitioning a project from construction to operations, can you tell me how you provide them with the most value?
That's a great question, Eric. I think the simple answer is that I provide the most value to our customers by helping them to begin recognizing revenue in the shortest time frame possible. I think that, we deal with projects in all of the different ISOs, and each one of those ISOs has very specific guidelines and checklists required for a project to move into the operational phase. I think it's usually just as simple as understanding those requirements and then utilizing the right experts to meet those needs and to make sure that those requirements are met, and then having enough time to complete the process. So I think as long as, we can help our clients start that process with enough time to complete whatever the checklist may be or whatever buckets need to be filled, then really it's just helping them find the right experts, whether it be companies that are doing automatic voltage control testing or whatever other testing is required. It's really just helping them find those experts and then, getting the process done as quickly as possible so their site is online and recognizing revenue as quickly as possible.
Right. I mean, that is the name of the game, right? Getting the systems up and running and producing. So with all that we've said here today, just some closing thoughts. First and foremost, on my part, I definitely want everyone on the call to understand what you can and cannot control. You need to have a cognizant appreciation of strategy and the ownership goals, and the asset management group is going to be integral in making you aware of that and kind of sticking to those goal deadlines. I certainly want you to think about, whether or not you're making as much money as you could. If you're not making as much money, why not? Do you have the tools in place to do the analysis, to really understand what's going on? And then at least to what are you doing about it? Where is the revenue going and why aren't you capturing it? So Larry, can you comment as to your closing thoughts and just reference some of the points on this slide and just help us put a bow on this entire webinar?
Yeah, so we've got this set here to be a segue to our next discussion, which is going to be on November 7th, right? And that is really what we've done here is set up how we approach asset management, what type of people can be successful, and then understanding what you can provide them with to let them get to it. But really, what you're asking, right? Any report you send out, any owner, it is those final three thoughts that we're going to spend the time on next time. And that is, quite literally, is the project turning over the cash not as it should be, but as it could be, right? It's one thing to hit your targets, right, and to hit your model, but certainly as an ownership position, after you've paid, after you've dealt with debt and O&M expenses and other project payables, right, and all the things that you can't control, right, and that real trick you're making as much as you could, comes down to those incremental gains, right, at the end, right? If 90% of the dollars, based upon revenue coming through your project is already spoken for, right, and you're looking to make a 10% return as the owner in your project, it's truly understanding that, hey, increasing project performance by 1% actually increases your profits by 10%, right? I know those numbers are a little loose and it's a lot more complex than that, but it makes the point, right? And so you need your asset manager to understand, really where is that gap and where is it going, right? And then having a plan to improve that and bring the most out of it.
Interesting. And Lee, is there anything else that you would like our guests on this webinar to take from the conversation today, from your point of view?
And I think just overall, to mirror some of the comments that we made earlier, I think we're all sort of in the same boat here in the asset management industry in determining what are the best tools to use, how do we automate efficiently and effectively, and how do we continue to grow more efficient as an industry. And I think, like what Larry said, we started by talking about people, tools, and then how we plan for success. And I think the next step is really exactly what Larry said. Are we performing? If not, what are we doing about it? And I look forward to talking about that in more detail on November 2nd with the second part of the webinar.
Great, thank you. And I guess with that, we can move it on to Kelsey.
All right, guys. Yeah, thank you. We are going to open up the floor now for some additional questions. Remember, you can continue to submit questions at any time in the Q&A widget. And our first question will be, what automation tools do you use at EDF?
I can take a stab at answering that. Oh.
Can you have at Lee?
Okay. I think we'll just speak broadly and not talk about the specific vendors that we work with, but the tools that we find to really help make our process efficient and smooth. We have an accounting system that we find to be very user-friendly, which really helps us to be able to provide balance sheets and project P&L and whatever other, accounting reports that we need to provide on a monthly basis. We also use a compliance platform, which really helps us to make sure that we are meeting all of our contractual requirements on time. And then I think that, like I said, we're looking into the future to sort of figure out what sort of tools that we can use to be able to reach out to all of the systems that we do data entry in every month. And then we also have some internal tools that have been built which, pull SCADA data and let us monitor what's going on site to be able to see, which turbines are performing well and which ones are not, and really help us do a deeper level of analysis. And we can provide that information to our customers to help optimize plant performance.
All right, thank you, Lee. Here's our next question. How does performing asset management differ for a third party versus an owned asset?
Sure, I'll take this one. So there's a little bit of a nuance to this answer. In some respects, the basic level of what I'll say the services or the administration part of that coming up, right, are going to be the same. You're making sure that all the compliance is met, right, that the bills are good, that the revenue is coming in, that the invoices are going out, right, that all of the basic things happen. That's, a project is a project is a project. Now, what gets to be a little different at the first level of that is what systems we're using. So, every company has their own ERP that they use. I think I can say this, that, EDF, for strategic reasons, far above anybody on this call's pay grade, we're an SAP shop, right? Everybody's familiar, they're probably either SAP or Oracle, right? So we know that that's the environment that we have to work in if it were to be an owned project or on our books, whereas in a third party, the challenge comes in we're going to have to interface with any of the other pieces out there, and how do we get information in and out of it? So that difference certainly exists, and in some way often beyond our control, which requires us to be flexible. But then, the other at the higher level, probably the more important strategic part of the question is, what is the strategy, right? And how do you manage the project accordingly? So, on an owned project, right, you may be looking at your own. This is a project that we plan on holding for 20 years as an IPP, right? This is a project that's slated for a flip, right? That's going to define many of the decisions you make and then how you approach the long-term management of the plant. Whereas, often managing for a third party, they may have different interests, right? They literally may be trying to maximize the current production or value of the project to flip it, right? They may be looking, to hold down costs, right, to improve the numbers, to maybe get better rates on a refinance. So not being, right, I guess would be having that some competing interests from, what the project itself is trying to be.
Gotcha. Okay, our next question, how exactly is documentation transferred from construction team to operational team?
I can just take a stab at this one. I think, we were talking earlier about how a smooth transition from construction into operations really makes a big difference in how well we can manage the plant. And I think typically what we've done in successful projects where that transition has gone smoothly is we set up a data room far in advance of commercial operation and have constant communications with the program manager or the construction team, whoever's managing the construction of the project, and get documents as they're executed. They're uploaded onto the share file site or whatever data room that we're using. And that way the asset manager can start reviewing those in advance. And then we always get a copy of the closing set of documents from the attorneys who are typically working on the financing aspects of the project. So therefore, we've got upfront documents that we can refer to far in advance of being responsible for the compliance. And then we also have a fully complete set of all documents that are easily referenceable as we continue our management.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thank you, guys. That's all the time we have for questions today. If you have additional unanswered questions, feel free to contact our presenters on your own. And a reminder, this webinar will be shared with all registrants, so you can view it again at your convenience. I'd like to thank Larry, Lee, and Eric again for being here, and EDF Renewable Services for sponsoring today's webinar. And thank you to everyone in our audience for participating. I hope you enjoyed our presentation, and we invite you to join us for more Solar Power World webinars in the future. Thank you.